All right, let me set the stage for you. I'm 25, a builder by trade, working my ass off to keep things together. My wife, Emma, is 22 and works as a waitress at this small diner in town. Our life isn't glamorous. Think squeaky floors, secondhand furniture, and eating ramen at least twice a week. But it's ours. We're not rolling in cash, but I thought we were doing okay. I thought we were okay. But then little things started to feel off. It's nothing you'd immediately notice. Just these tiny, almost untraceable changes. Like, she started coming home a little later than usual, always with an excuse about a late customer or a coworker needing help. Her laughter, something that used to echo through our crappy little apartment, had grown quieter. She'd sit on the couch after her shift, scrolling through her phone with this faraway look in her eyes. When I'd ask her about work, she'd shrug and give me one-word answers, like she didn't even want to talk about her day anymore. At first, I didn't think much of it. I chalked it up to stress. I mean, working as a waitress isn't exactly easy. You've got rude customers, low tips, and long hours on your feet. Hell, I get it. I'm hauling bricks and breaking my back for 10 hours a day. But there was something different, something I couldn't put my finger on. The first real gut punch came last Friday night. I just wrapped up a long week at the site and decided to swing by the diner to surprise her. I figured I'd grab a coffee, see her smile, maybe remind her that I'm still here, you know? But when I got there, she wasn't on the floor. Her coworker, Maria, gave me this awkward look when I asked where Emma was. "She's on break," she said quickly, like she didn't want to elaborate. Okay, fair enough. I went back out of my truck to wait. I figured she'd be out in 5-10 minutes tops. But 15 minutes went by, then 20. And that's when I saw her. She came out through the back door, but she wasn't alone. She was with some guy. I didn't recognize him, but he looked too comfortable with her. The way he stood close, the way she laughed at whatever dumb thing he said, it wasn't just friendly. His hand brushed her arm, and she didn't pull away. I wanted to jump out of the truck, call out to her, or even just do something, but I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe I was scared of what I'd find out. Maybe I thought I was overreacting. Instead, I just sat there, frozen, as they talked for a few more minutes before parting ways. She went back inside without a glance in my direction. I drove home that night feeling like the floor had just been ripped out from under me. It didn't make sense. Emma and I have been through so much together. We've built this life from nothing. She wouldn't just throw that away, would she? But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, something inside me knew. This wasn't nothing. This was the start of something. Looking back, that was the moment the cracks started to show. And once you see them, there's no going back. After that Friday night, the doubt had planted itself deep in my mind. I tried to shake it off, convince myself that maybe I'd blown the whole thing out of proportion. But no matter how hard I tried, the image of Emma with that guy lingered. It gnawed at me through the weekend, leaving me restless and distracted. By Monday, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to confront her. When Emma came home that evening, I decided to lay it all out. I told her what I'd seen outside the diner, every detail, how they'd stood too close, how they'd laughed like old friends, the way his hand lingered on her arm. I expected anger or denial, maybe even an outburst. But instead, she looked startled, almost panicked, like she hadn't anticipated being caught in the first place. Her explanation came in a rush. The man, she assured me, was nothing more than a regular customer. He came into the diner a few times a week, always sitting in her section, and they occasionally chatted while she worked. It wasn't unusual for waitresses to make small talk with regulars, she reminded me. It was part of the job, nothing more. Emma claimed the interaction I saw was innocent, just a friendly exchange taken out of context. She insisted there was no hidden meaning behind their laughter or the way they stood close. It was all in my head, she said, a misunderstanding fueled by stress or overthinking. There had never been anything between them, and there never would be. She assured me that her commitment to me hadn't wavered, that I was the only one who mattered. She told me she didn't bring it up before because, to her, it wasn't worth mentioning. He was just a customer, nothing more. Her words sounded sincere. She seemed genuinely upset, almost desperate to convince me. But the unease in my gut didn't fade. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Her explanation came too quickly, as if rehearsed, and her eyes darted away just a little too often. She wasn't angry or defensive, just uneasy, as though she knew the story wasn't as airtight as she wanted me to believe. I nodded, pretending to accept her assurances. She seemed relieved when the conversation ended, her posture loosening as she walked to the shower. But I wasn't as convinced as I let on. Her story made sense on the surface, but it still didn't erase the image of her standing there, laughing with him, like he was someone special. If it really was nothing, why hadn't she mentioned him before? Why did it feel like she was hiding something, even now? As the water ran in the bathroom, I sat in silence, the doubts still swirling. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe I was overthinking everything. But there was a nagging voice in the back of my mind, whispering that there was more to this than she was letting on. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But some part of me knew this wasn't over. For a few days, I couldn't shake the weight of suspicion. Every interaction with Emma felt like a test. Every smile or casual touch shadowed by that nagging doubt in the back of my mind. I told myself I was just being cautious, but deep down, I hated the person I was becoming, paranoid, distrustful, a version of myself I didn't recognize. But then things started to feel normal again. Emma's behavior seemed to shift in subtle but reassuring ways. She came home on time, often earlier than expected, and greeted me with that familiar smile I thought I'd lost. She started sharing more details about her day, talking about customers, coworkers, and the little annoyances of life at the diner. It wasn't forced or defensive, just the easy rhythm we'd always had before my doubts crept in. Her phone habits, which had been bothering me, also seemed to change. She left it on the counter or the couch like she used to, and there were no secretive glances or quick flips to hide the screen. I even caught her laughing at some meme she'd seen, casually handing me her phone to show me. It felt genuine, unguarded, like there was nothing to hide. One night, as we sat together on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder, I felt that old warmth between us. She talked about the diner, complaining about a rude customer who left a terrible tip, and I found myself laughing along. It was the kind of mundane, shared moment that felt so natural, so real. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. I started to think that maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe I'd let my own insecurities and stress get the better of me. After all, nothing had actually happened. The guy at the diner, if he was even worth thinking about, could have just been a friendly customer. Emma's explanation made sense, and there was no evidence to suggest otherwise. I'd been so caught up in my own head, convincing myself that something was wrong, that I'd started seeing shadows where there was only light. I decided to let it go, to move on. Emma deserved better than a husband who doubted her every move, and I deserved better than to torture myself with baseless fears. Relationships were built on trust, and if I didn't trust her now, what kind of foundation did we have? That night, I wrapped my arms around her as we fell asleep, the tension in my chest easing for the first time in days. Whatever doubts I'd had, they didn't matter anymore. Emma was here, and I was here, and that was enough. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Things had been going smoothly for a while. After I pushed the doubts out of my head, life started to feel normal again, like the weight that had been pressing down on my chest had finally lifted. Emma was warm, attentive, and everything seemed to fall back into place. I convinced myself that the worst of it was behind us, that I'd been worrying over nothing. And then came Friday night. Emma casually mentioned over dinner that she'd made plans to go out with some friends from work. It didn't sound strange at first. She'd always been social, and I knew she loved blowing off steam with her coworkers after long shifts. Just a few drinks at this bar downtown, she said with a smile as she cleared her plate. I nodded, brushing it off like it was nothing. After all, I'd promised myself I wouldn't overthink things anymore. But as the night wore on, something didn't sit right. Emma wasn't usually one to stay out late, and when she did go out with her friends, she'd always come home at a reasonable hour. By 11 p.m., I expected to hear her keys jingling at the door, her laughter filling the apartment as she kicked off her shoes. Instead, there was silence. Midnight came and went. I tried calling her around 12:30, but it went straight to voicemail. I told myself she was probably in a loud bar and didn't hear the phone ring. No big deal. At 1:15 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emma. "Hey babe, had a little too much to drink. Decided to crash at Maria's place. Don't wait up. Love you." I stared at the message for a long moment, trying to process it. Emma never did this. In all the time we'd been together, she'd always made it home, no matter what. Even when she went out drinking, she'd call me to pick her up or book a rideshare. Staying overnight at a friend's place? That was a first. At first, I told myself not to overreact. Maria was one of her closest friends, and it wasn't unreasonable for her to crash there if she'd had too much to drink. But the longer I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. This was out of character for Emma, not just the overnight stay, but the way she phrased the text. It felt distant, almost like she'd rehearsed it. I tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't stop spinning. What if she wasn't at Maria's? What if she was with someone else? The doubts I thought I'd buried started to creep back in, stronger than before. I wanted to believe her. I really did, but the timing of it all felt too convenient. I told myself there was no point in jumping to conclusions. I couldn't accuse her of. I told myself there was no point in jumping to conclusions. I had no reason to doubt her. Emma had explained everything before, and I'd promised to trust her. But that night, trust felt like a fragile thing, splintering under the weight of my unease. The text sat there on my screen, mocking me every time I reread it. Had a little too much to drink. Decided to crash at Maria's place. I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. But something about it didn't feel right. Emma wasn't reckless, and she wasn't the type to drink herself into a situation where she couldn't make it home. She hated being out of her routine, hated sleeping anywhere other than our bed. So why now? Why this sudden change? I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to quiet the storm of thoughts in my head. Maybe she really was just blowing off steam with Maria and the other waitresses. Maybe I was overthinking it again, letting my insecurities get the better of me. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Around 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep and got out of bed. The apartment was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every creak and whisper of doubt. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, my phone sitting in front of me like a ticking time bomb. I stared at Emma's text, debating whether to reply, whether to call her again. Instead, I opened the tracking app I'd installed on her phone weeks ago. I hadn't used it since I convinced myself everything was fine. But tonight felt different. My finger hovered over the screen for a long moment before I tapped it. Her location popped up almost instantly. She wasn't at Maria's apartment. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared at the blinking dot on the map. It wasn't even close to Maria's. The address it showed was unfamiliar, a residential area on the other side of town. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe Maria had moved, and I just didn't know about it. Maybe they were at another friend's place, someone Emma hadn't mentioned. But deep down, I knew those were just excuses. The truth was staring me in the face, and it felt like a punch to the gut. I sat there for what felt like hours, torn between confronting her and waiting to see what she'd say when she came home. My hands shook as I gripped the edge of the table, anger and confusion swirling inside me. She'd lied. There was no other way to explain it. The one thing I thought I could count on, her honesty, was suddenly in question. By the time the sun started to rise, I was still sitting in the same spot, my mind a chaotic mess of emotions. I didn't know what I'd say when she walked through the door, but one thing was clear. This wasn't nothing. This was the moment I realized the cracks I thought I'd patched up were wider than ever, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. The restlessness from the night before hadn't gone away. Emma had walked in that morning like nothing was wrong, casually mentioning how much fun she'd had at Maria's. She even smiled, carefree and genuine, as if the weight of last night didn't exist. I wanted to confront her, but something held me back. I wasn't ready. Not yet. After work that day, I decided to stop by the diner. I told myself I just needed a little clarity, something to quiet the storm in my mind. If she'd been with Maria and the other waitresses like she claimed, they'd confirm it. I wasn't looking for a fight. I just wanted to be sure. The diner was busy when I arrived, the usual hum of clinking plates and chatter filling the air. Maria was behind the counter, moving quickly between coffee pots and plates. I scanned the room, expecting to see Emma darting between tables, but she wasn't there. I checked twice, even peering into the kitchen through the swinging door. Nothing. A pang of unease hit me. Emma hadn't mentioned taking the day off, and it wasn't like her to skip work without a reason. I approached the counter, keeping my expression neutral as I caught Maria's attention. It didn't take long to realize something was off. Maria's reaction was casual at first, but as I asked more about the night before, her confusion became clear. According to her, there hadn't been any bar outing, no after-work drinks. She'd worked late and gone straight home. She seemed almost as puzzled as I felt. I left the diner quickly, my chest tightening as I walked to my truck. Sitting there in the parking lot, I tried to piece it together. Emma hadn't been at the bar with Maria and her co-workers. She hadn't been at the diner today either. The story she'd told me, the one about too much alcohol and crashing at Maria's, was starting to unravel. It wasn't just a single inconsistency. It was layers stacking on top of each other, each one making it harder to ignore the truth staring me in the face. Emma had lied about where she was, about who she was with, and probably about more than I even realized. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white. Every time I thought I could trust her, she gave me another reason to doubt. And this time, I wasn't sure I could explain it away. Driving home from the diner, my mind raced in circles. The inconsistencies were piling up, and no matter how hard I tried to give Emma the benefit of the doubt, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. The lies weren't just minor omissions anymore. They were deliberate, calculated. When I got home, the apartment felt heavier than usual, like the air itself was charged with tension. Emma wasn't back yet, and I couldn't decide if that made things better or worse. Her text earlier that morning still sat on my phone, staring back at me like a challenge. Had a little too much to drink. Decided to crash at Maria's place. A lie. It was undeniable now. I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone, trying to calm the storm inside me. I opened the tracking app again, not sure what I was looking for. Her location from the night before was still saved. Some residential neighborhood on the other side of town. Not Maria's. Not anywhere I recognized. I thought about driving there, about sitting outside and trying to figure out who lived there. But what would that even accomplish? I already knew she wasn't where she said she'd been. Seeing the place wouldn't magically explain everything. It wouldn't make me feel any less betrayed. Hours passed, and I just sat there, running through every possible explanation. Maybe there was some innocent reason for all of this, some detail I was missing that would make it all make sense. But deep down, I knew the truth. I just wasn't ready to admit it to myself yet. Emma came home later than I expected, the door clicking open quietly, as if she were trying not to wake me. I stayed on the couch, pretending to scroll through my phone. She greeted me cheerfully, her tone light and carefree, like everything was perfectly normal. It was almost impressive, the way she acted like nothing had happened. But now, every smile she gave me, every casual touch, felt rehearsed. She went about her evening like usual, showering and settling into bed early. I stayed on the couch, saying I wasn't tired yet. In truth, I couldn't bear to lie next to her, not with the weight of everything I knew or thought I knew, hanging between us. As the apartment fell silent, I realized there was no going back from this. Whatever I decided to do next, I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. The cracks in our relationship weren't just cracks anymore. They were fissures, deep and widening with every lie. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. Maybe I didn't know Emma as well as I thought I did. The woman I'd built a life with, the one I'd trusted with everything, was suddenly a stranger. And that realization hurt more than anything else. But this wasn't over. Not yet. If she wasn't going to give me the truth, I was going to find it myself. The unease gnawed at me, growing stronger by the day. Emma's cheerful demeanor at home, her effortless lies, it all felt so rehearsed now, like a mask she put on to keep me in the dark. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know. Not guesses, not assumptions. I needed to see the truth with my own eyes, no matter how much it hurt. The opportunity came a few days later. Emma told me she was meeting up with Maria again after work for drinks. The mention of Maria's name was enough to set me on edge, given what I'd learned at the diner. I smiled, nodded, and told her to have fun. Inside, I was already planning my next move. After she left, I waited 15 minutes to give her a head start, then grabbed my keys and headed out. I had the tracking app still synced to her phone, but I didn't rely on it immediately. Instead, I drove toward the bar she'd mentioned, parking a block away where I could watch the entrance without being seen. My heart pounded as I waited, scanning every face that entered or exited. She didn't show. After 30 minutes, I opened the tracking app, and my stomach sank as her location popped up on the screen. She wasn't anywhere near the bar. She was across town, in the same residential neighborhood as before, the one I didn't recognize. I drove in silence, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every second felt like an eternity. When I reached the neighborhood, I parked a few houses down from her location, keeping my truck out of sight. The house was modest, unremarkable, with a neatly trimmed lawn and a porch light that cast a warm glow on the front steps. And there she was. Emma stood outside, leaning casually against the porch railing, laughing at something the man beside her had said. It was the same man from the diner, the one I'd seen her with before. He leaned closer, his hand brushing her arm as they spoke. She didn't pull away. In fact, she leaned into him, her posture relaxed and familiar, like this wasn't their first time here together. They weren't just talking. They were comfortable, intimate, the kind of closeness that doesn't come from a casual friendship. My chest tightened as I watched him place a hand on her lower back, guiding her inside the house. The door closed behind them, leaving me sitting alone in the dark, my world crumbling around me. For a moment, I thought about storming up to the door, pounding on it until they had no choice but to face me. I imagined confronting them both, demanding answers, forcing them to explain how they could do this to me. But as quickly as the anger flared, it faded into something colder, calculated. A scandal wouldn't solve anything. It wouldn't undo the betrayal or give me the answers I needed. All it would do was expose my hand, give Emma a chance to twist the narrative in her favor. No, I wasn't going to let her off that easily. Not yet. I stayed in my truck for what felt like hours, watching the house from a distance. At one point, I saw shadows moving behind the curtains, but I couldn't make out what was happening. It didn't matter. I'd already seen enough. The laughter, the touch, the familiarity, it confirmed everything I'd been dreading. When I finally drove away, my hands shook on the wheel. The pain was overwhelming, but I swallowed it down, forcing myself to focus. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Emma thought she could keep me in the dark, spinning her lies while carrying on with someone else. She had no idea what was coming. For 2 days, I carried the weight of what I'd seen, letting it simmer beneath the surface. Emma acted like nothing had changed, moving around the house with the same calm, effortless rhythm she always had. She smiled, made small talk about her day, and sat close to me on the couch at night, as though we were the picture of a happy, normal couple. But every time I looked at her, all I could see was her laughter with him, the way she leaned into his touch like it was second nature. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The silence was suffocating, and the lies she so easily told made it unbearable. That evening, I finally decided it was time to confront her. The moment had been building all day, and by the time we were alone in the kitchen, I couldn't keep it bottled up anymore. She was scrolling through her phone at the table, her posture relaxed, completely unaware of what was coming. My chest felt tight as I sat across from her, the weight of my thoughts pressing down on me like a storm about to break. I took a deep breath and let the truth spill out. As I laid everything bare, I watched her face shift. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally a flicker of panic. Her initial reaction was one of dismissal, her body stiffening as though she could brush it all off. She straightened in her seat, her expression hardening as she tried to compose herself. But I didn't stop. I told her what I'd seen, recounting every moment with precision, leaving no room for ambiguity. Her face paled as the details sank in. For a moment, I thought she might confess, that the weight of her guilt would crack whatever defenses she had left. But instead, she shook her head, her movements tight and deliberate, refusing to look at me. She stayed silent, offering no explanation, no apology, nothing but the faint tremble of her hands. The air between us was heavy, The kind of silence that felt louder than any argument. I didn't need her to say anything. Her silence was an answer in itself. And it only confirmed what I already knew. She wouldn't admit to the affair, but she couldn't deny it either. Not anymore. As I stood up from the table, her shoulders slumped slightly, her gaze dropping to the floor. The calm, confident mask she'd worn so well had started to crack, and beneath it, I saw the guilt she was trying so desperately to hide. But even then, she couldn't meet my eyes. I left her sitting there, her phone still in her hand, her expression frozen in a mix of fear and shame. I didn't look back as I walked out of the kitchen. I didn't need to. The damage was done, and whatever came next, I knew there was no salvaging what we had. Leaving wasn't an impulse. It wasn't a moment of rage or some dramatic fight that pushed me out the door. It was quiet, painfully quiet. That's what betrayal does. It robs you of your voice, leaves you staring at the pieces of your life wondering how it all fell apart. But there's only so long you can sit in the wreckage before you realize you need to get up and move. The morning after I confronted Emma, I packed my things. No shouting, no final blowout, just silence. I grabbed a couple of duffel bags, stuffed in my clothes, my tools, and anything else that was mine. As I moved through the apartment, I noticed how everything around me felt hollow. This place we'd built together wasn't mine anymore, not really. It belonged to a version of us that didn't exist anymore. She was still asleep when I left. I didn't leave a note. What was there to say? Good luck with your new life? I hope he's worth it. I wasn't going to waste any more of my words on someone who had already thrown me away. I walked out of that door and didn't look back. The first few weeks were hell. I crashed at a buddy's place, sleeping on his lumpy couch and pretending I wasn't falling apart inside. Every day felt like I was dragging myself through quicksand. I worked long hours just to avoid going back to that empty couch, and when I wasn't working, I was replaying everything in my head. The lies. The nights she said she was with friends. All of it. It was like some sick, twisted highlight reel I couldn't shut off. But somewhere in that chaos, I found something I hadn't expected. Anger. Not the kind that eats you alive, but the kind that lights a fire under you. I was angry at her, sure, but I was even angrier at myself. Angry that I'd let my life get so small, that I'd ignored the warning signs, that I'd stayed when I should have walked away months ago. That anger turned into fuel. I threw myself into work. Every job, every project, I tackled it like it was the only thing keeping me breathing. And honestly, maybe it was. My boss started noticing. First came the compliments, then the bigger responsibilities. Before I knew it, I was leading projects, managing teams, and earning promotions I never thought I'd get. The extra hours weren't just a distraction anymore. They were my way forward. Years passed, and the guy who walked out of that apartment became someone completely different. I went from a builder barely scraping by to a chief engineer managing million-dollar projects. The money was good, better than I'd ever imagined, but it wasn't just about that. It was about proving to myself that I could stand on my own, that I didn't need anyone else to give me purpose. I bought a house, a real one, with floors that didn't creak and faucets that didn't leak. I started traveling, seeing places I'd only dreamed about. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and slowly rebuilt a life that was mine, completely mine. Looking back, I barely recognized the person I was back then. The guy who ignored his gut, who clung to a broken relationship out of fear of losing what little he had. He's gone, and good riddance. If you're reading this and going through something similar, here's what I want you to know. Walking away isn't weakness. It's strength. When someone betrays you, it's easy to think you're the problem, that you're not enough. But here's the truth. Their betrayal says everything about them and nothing about you. Don't waste your life trying to fix something that's broken beyond repair. You owe it to yourself to walk away and build something better. Use the pain. It's going to be there no matter what. So you might as well turn it into fuel. Work on yourself. Push harder than you ever thought you could. Find what makes you happy, and don't let anyone take that from you again. Walking out of that apartment was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the best decision of my life. Sometimes, the only way to find yourself is to lose everything first.